Welcome to Galveston Unscripted. Hello, Galveston Unscripted listeners. I have got a great one for you today, very informative. In this episode, I sit down and speak with Chief Peter Davis of Galveston Island Beach Patrol. As you guys know, Galveston Beach Patrol is extremely important to the island today. But have you ever wondered how long Beach Patrol has actually been around? In this episode, Chief Peter Davis and I discuss the history of Galveston Beach Patrol, some general Galveston history, and, of course, a little bit of beach safety. Let's jump right into my conversation with Chief Peter Davis.
And welcome to our castle here down on Stewart Beach. This is the building that, everybody's talking about, like that we're going to hopefully see it, go away. It was built in 1984 after Hurricane Alicia. Which was the year after I started. And we had another building down here that was smaller, and Beach Patrol worked, we were just talking about this, but Beach Patrol worked out of a trailer. And so we would go stand in the sand and get our little radio assignments. And of course there were 17 people on Beach Patrol back then, not 154.
Yeah, huge operation.
It's a lot bigger. I mean, there's a lot more babysitting, but it's also, we do a lot more. We have to. I mean, we're looking at between 7 and 8 million tourists a year on the beach now. And so the demand is just, gotten crazy. And that doesn't even count climate change, COVID, increases in tourism, all the use of the West End, like all the stuff that's been growing and stuff like that. So.
Well, I was going to say, I think the last time I was in this room was during a disciplinary action meeting.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You probably had all this bad juju on the walls, right?
Yeah.
But that's something too that we've really had to learn is sort of like how to manage like a big group, because it used to be small enough where we could just go wake people up when they didn't show up for work.
Yep.
And we really have learned lessons about being consistent and management. We take a lot of, we do a lot of training now and that kind of stuff, because you really want to make sure that your work environment is really a great place for people to work. And I mean, and so, we were voted best place to work on the island this year. I think was the third year, maybe the fourth. And so we're hitting the mark in some areas, but we have a lot of, room to improve.
Yeah. I do want to say, I mean, I worked here from 2010 to 2015, and it was one of the best places I've ever worked, honestly. It's the most rewarding job I think I've ever had is Beach Patrol. Even, you go work out every day, you go sit on the beach, and it really does feel rewarding when you do have to, go rescue somebody.
That's nice to hear. I really like, the little tiny piece that I can take credit for. I appreciate, but it is nice to have a job where, when you go home, what you do that day really impacts people. And I think a lot of people, after they work here for a short time or even as long as you did, kind of look back at it as, oh, wait, everything really made sense. Like when I would go home, I moved, 143 people away from rip currents. I made a rescue. I really made an impact in people's lives. And that's really, that kind of, you're 90% of the way there. I mean, if we're not under those conditions, if we're not managing fairly well, it's on us, because it is a wonderful thing to do. And I feel really lucky to have gotten to spend so much of my life, lifeguarding. It's just a great, career. But you wanted to talk about history.
Yeah. Let's actually. Okay. Before we start on the history of Beach Patrol, you were mentioning to me that you are possibly seventh generation Galvestonian.
Yeah. If my mom wasn't lying, which I don't think she was, me and my brother, I had 3 brothers. We were 7th generation Galvestonians, and our family is one of the 3 families that settled the island permanently, supposedly. Mm-hmm. So there was us, which we were like kind of a French-German mix. There was a German family, there was a Jewish family. We all apparently came together. Yeah. And I don't know the third family. The Whitticks were the Jewish family, which is really cool. So I have a daughter, and of my siblings, we're the only ones living here. And so my daughter, I think, might be the only 8th generation Galvestonian on the island now.
What a claim to fame for her.
I feel really bad for her. She's like 16, and I'm sure if she ever hears this, she's going to like punch me or something. Yeah. But no, that's true. I mean, I have like my mom, growing up, she was a beach girl too. And she always told me stories about, that they would go down with her aunts, these German ladies, and, they would, bring fine china down there and set up tablecloths and, have this like really nice meal of chicken and whatever down there. Gosh. And then she would go sit on Leroy Colombo's lap, because my mom would be about 5 years old. Yep. They'd go over there by Murdoch's, and Leroy Colombo would be guarding. And then, he liked this little brown beach kid, and he'd always like, come up here, whatever. So apparently she sat up there all the time and then, would supposedly help him lifeguard.
Yeah.
Which is really cool to know that like your family, has this like lineage of beach history, because we don't associate that with Texas a lot of times. We think of, this legacy that's passed down through generations in Hawaii of water skills and, beach skills and that kind of stuff, California, of course, and a bit on the East Coast. But we don't think of Texas as having this long history, but we really do. Like, we can trace our life-saving roots continuously back to 1875, when there was a life station down there at San Luis Pass area. Then there were some gaps before that, but even in the 1840s, there was some kind of lifeguard service here. And in those years, there wasn't recreational swimming to speak of. And so they were literally looking for boat wrecks. And they would have like, a group of people, living in a community down there, and basically all the men, because that's how it worked back then, right? But all the men would be the lifesaver men. There'd be a station master, then their families and everything would be around there as sort of like a support system for that. And that dates really far back. And then as we kind of moved into Industrial Revolution, leisure class, recreational swimming started popping up. And so Galveston was, on the map big time back then. And so Galveston was a really important spot, for kind of the upper middle class, rich people to come and, enjoy the healing, what does they call it? The healing powers of the salt water. You read these old like posters and stuff. It's really interesting. So they had like bathing machines where they would push the machines out into the water, and then, the swimmer would step down into the water in like a big outfit or something and get back in. And then they'd probably go to Crystal Palace and party and
of course,
all that stuff
and
afterwards.
Get into all kinds of other things, I'm sure.
So we have, and, beach guarding started, very early in the turn of the century then. And so we had, volunteer lifeguard service until about the 30s, paid lifeguards. It kind of bounced around. It sat at about 17 to 25 people. It would just kind of come and go with politics and with whatever funding. And that went on for years and years and years, even into, up into the 80s. And so in 81, we were passed from the management of the police department under the sheriff's office. There was a Moody grant that really funded a whole bunch of our infrastructure. And we started using hot tax money that was funneled through the Park Board of Trustees. The Park Board had been established in like 61 or 63 or something like that. I think it was 63. And so the vehicle was already there, to do that. And our money started coming through there. Although like when I started, we were a division of the sheriff's office, and the money flowed, through the city park board. And then, not even that long ago, it's been about 15, 16 years ago, we ended up, a little bit before were there. But
when I was in junior guards, we were still wearing sheriff's green.
You were still wearing green and white.
Yep.
Right.
Green and white, yep.
Yeah. See, that shows how old you are.
I'm getting old. I know.
It's not easy. So when we went to, move from being just under the county with the city funding, park board funding, we moved just under the management of the park board those years ago. So we still, have a whole lot of debt, I think, to the sheriff's office, because we have a lot of our infrastructure, our policies, all this kind of stuff. We're very sophisticated for a beach lifeguard agency at the time, because we had that affiliation with the law enforcement entity. And then the park board has really, the last few years particularly, has really stepped up their game a lot too. And so now we have a whole lot of give and take with other departments, a lot of sharing. And it's been really wonderful for me because, for the longest time, we were just making do with what we had. And now we just really have this support system we never really had before.
Yeah.
So we have, great HR department. We have, great relationship with the beach, coastal zone management people. The parks are there for us, the CVB, all this kind of stuff. And so, it's really nice I really like this sort of team thing. Like, I think that we're a lot stronger in groups, and so making all these connections with different groups within the park board, our other partners in public safety through the Galveston Marine Response, and then even other groups like the Marine Mammal Stranding Network, or the turtle people, or our own junior guard program, Survivor Support Network program, Wave Watchers. We have all these kind of affiliations that I think create basically a water safety net that reduces drowning, because, 7.5 million people a year is way too much for one lifeguard service to handle. So we really need to kind of create a culture of water safety to help keep people from drowning. And you know that from when you were a guard.
I do, yeah. And I wanted to say, you know, speaking of building a culture of water safety is just the junior guard program that you guys have. It's starting young. I think the youngest you can hop in is 10 or 11.
No,
right?
10. Yeah,
10,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
So yeah. And you know, speaking personally, me going through that junior guard program just taught me so much about water safety and actually being out in the water. And I remember I used to live on 57th and Mako, right behind where Kroger is, right? So I remember going out, and I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and there was a guy in waders, fishing waders, and he fell over, and his waders filled up with water. And I remember being 13 in junior guards, going out there and helping this guy up, stand up.
God, that's so cool.
And I probably wouldn't have done that if I was in junior guards.
No, that has been, you know, that's been a really cool thing with junior guards, because every year or two we get these stories. We just had a couple of our junior guards do CPR on a person.
Wow.
And, you know, just this kind of, or I've heard a couple of years ago there was a rescue in Costa Rica by one of our junior guards while they were out surfing. Like, this kind of thing is really neat. It's this whole concept, which is not foreign to us now because of COVID, but, you know, this whole concept of herd immunity, where if everyone's inoculated except for a couple of people in a bigger group, they're probably not going to catch whatever the thing is. And drowning works in a very similar way. Like, the junior guard program, or the 30,000 or so kids we hit at these water safety talks when we do our spring education program out in the schools. You know, the idea is that, like, if these kids all sort of have the basics of how, I would keep it simple, but how not to drown when they go out in the water, the little things, you know, like stay away from rock jetties or don't go too far out, or, you know, whatever the little rules are that we push out there. You know, if they all know that, then their friends won't exceed those rules because they're going to be with the group that knows it. So the more kids we can train, the more people are prepared to be safe when they come to the beach. And it takes the burden, you know, not just off of us, but off of all of our society, or or Galveston or whatever. It reduces liability, you know, it enhances tourism. Like, everybody, you know, benefits from this. So the really important thing I think of our mission is, you know, we do the things that lifeguards are supposed to do: rescue, train, you know, prevent accidents directly, that kind of stuff. But we also have this huge component of public education. Even, you know, getting to talk a little bit about water safety with you is really valuable. Like, just to get it out to as many places as we can. So when people come here, you don't count on the lifeguard being your only line of defense. You want several things to have to fail before you get in trouble.
I think I want to go back and touch on the initiation of Beach Patrol, or a Beach Patrol organization. I was reading a little bit about the San Luis Pass station, and also that there was a station set up at Coons Wharf. So I know you mentioned that they would have
earlier, I think.
Yeah. It really all initiated from rescuing people on ships, whether they were, you know, ships that were on fire, burning, sinking. Yeah. But that's how it initiated, and then moved more into a beach service style. Beach Patrol, or the Beach Patrol organization, was federally funded. Actually, they received over like $200,000 from the federal government. So I guess that shows how important Galveston was.
Yeah, being such a busy port, and that was before you know, Houston really got as big as it was with the port and everything like that. Boats didn't have as deep a draft back then, so they could get into Galveston really easily. And so, you know, you ended up with the U.S. Lifesaving Service, and there was federal funding that came to all these places all around the country through that. Because at the time, ships were our main means of moving goods and services around, and people too. Like, there wasn't this whole infrastructure we have now to get around. And so they wanted to protect that as best they could. And so that was worth the money putting in there. But even if you look at the history through that stuff, like you mentioned, there was a fire, and, you know, there was people and I think animals on a boat that everybody was standing around on the wharf watching it burn, watching people die, you know, that kind of stuff happen. If you read the history, and it's not just ours, but if you look at, you know, all around the country, or really all around the world, we kind of go in these surges. So we are not always the most proactive about any kind of public safety. And even back then it was true. So you would see that they would establish this great service for the time. And they'd have this equipment that would be contemporary, and they would have people train and stuff like that. And then nothing would happen, and then it would kind of fizzle away. And like you read these accounts, like the boats were stored somewhere else. They don't know where they were. And then something huge would happen, and then all of a sudden there'd be renewed interest, and then they would lobby for more money, or they would drum up people or whatever.
Yep.
And so you'd see this wharf place. Suddenly it was renewed, and then it was really good, and it ran for 20, 25 years, and then it would start fading again. We do the same thing now. I mean, if you look at, if you look historically at any public safety group, sometimes it takes a crisis for everybody to realize, oh, wait, this is really important.
Yes.
I think we've gotten better about it. And I think we've gotten better as representatives of the public safety groups, where we're talking police, fire, EMS, or life saving, of advocating for what our needs are. And so, and part of what's been helpful too with that is we're just a more litigious society. So, municipalities are scared of getting sued. And, if you look at lifeguarding, or look at water safety, there was a thing that was put out by the CDC. I think it's probably been almost 20 years now, called the Lifeguard Efficacy Report.
Okay.
And it said a couple of really interesting things in there. A community that makes money, I'm paraphrasing, but a community that makes money off of some kind of body of water. And this would, of course, be beaches, but it could also be lakeside communities, rivers, water parks, like that kind of stuff. If you're making money off of that, you have an obligation to educate and protect tourists that come to your community. So, not only do you want them to come, not only are you going to spend a bunch of money bringing people to the island, which we do a great job at.
Yeah.
But, Galveston's been really good too about creating an infrastructure where people are pretty safe when they come here. And so even though our beach has its own hazards, there's definitely challenges with guarding this part of the Texas coast. But we've done a great job since the 80s. Yeah. Better and better of providing a pretty, good lifeguard service, and keeping it really current. With what the global and national trends are, so that if we do get in these spots where people are going to drown, I mean, it's going to happen when you have a certain amount of people coming to an area. There are going to be things that happen, despite our best efforts. But if we're providing what the standard level of care is that's sort of appropriate for that time and place, then you're pretty protected from that kind of stuff. And it also sends a message out to your guests that, you're doing everything you can to keep them safe. Now, they have to do some things on their own,
of course,
to meet you halfway, but we as a community do a really good job of providing a lifeguard service for people when they come, and security for them when they come to the beach. And, we have a great police department. We have a great fire department. And EMS is awesome here. So it's kind of like you've built all this stuff. So we're meeting what our requirement are there. The other thing it talks about is the average cost for a drowning on that community, short term and the long term of the lifetime productivity of that person. And that's a really interesting concept to me.
Yeah.
Especially tied with a pretty new public safety profession like professional lifeguarding is. So like if somebody comes here and they drown, there are costs associated with it drowning to our community. And that could be an amortized cost of what an average drowning costs an average community in lawsuits. It could be all the expense of the people and the organizations that are responding to that, and all that happens with that. It can be the impact on tourism. Like there's all these pieces that go into that, and so they actually monetize that. And in those years, I'm thinking it was in the high 700s, so 780,000 ish.
Oh, really?
So in today's dollars, we're talking $1.5-2 million for an average drowning in an average community. That, really kind of like when you look at like our beach patrol here, our budget sits at about $3 million right now. Like it's it's not a real giant budget, but it's probably appropriate for what we're covering here. And it's paid for by hotel tax. So it's not ad valorem tax dollars. So if you look at, we put that money in, but each drowning we prevent potentially is saving us, $1.5 million as a community. I mean, there's a real dollar value. It's not just the humanitarian importance of doing that. It's the right thing to do. And we want to support our tourists because we get a lot out of them. And we want to make sure we repay that. Yeah. But it's also sort of makes financial good sense to put that money in on the front end and not have to pay it after. It's kind of like, you have a gym membership. That gym membership is going to keep you from having a heart attack at 45. And so you save yourself all that expense, but also our whole society not paying for you to like be, getting through life after that incident, right? We put you back 20 more years before you have a heart attack. We're a lot better off.
It's the upfront investment.
Exactly. And I think that that's a really important thing, to be proactive, especially in times like this where we're always looking for funding and this and that. And it's a really hard concept to not push that down the road a little bit, but to put that money in up front, and then you reap the rewards. Like every dollar we put into maintaining and protecting our beaches, according to this study that the CVB had done a few years ago, brings $7 back to the community.
So 1 to 7.
Pretty simple math.
And I do kind of want to touch on, the Beach Patrol does not only cover the beach. You guys cover the entire island. So it's like, how many miles of coastline? It's like a ridiculous amount of miles.
We do with our partners. So Galveston Marine Response with the Police Department Marine Division, the Sheriff's Office, the Fire Department's gotten really active. And then we've got a couple other groups that actually are on the water now. So we jointly respond to this stuff, and we share resources. We do so much better than we used to. Years back, we did a lot of the heavy lifting, but that's not been true since really Ike. But if you kind of look at how we lay stuff out, we've got 32, depending on who you talk to. It's Galveston. Everything's a little nebulous, right? But 32 or 33 miles of coast. We cover up to 3 miles offshore. And that's our primary area of responsibility. Of that 33 miles, 9 miles of those we proactively guard during the season with 32 lifeguard towers staffed, right? So all those hot spots, the jetties, along the seawall, or groins as they're accurately called, the beach parks like Stewart Beach and East Beach, Delnare Park, right? We do that. And then we have a patrol that runs every day on the west end. And then on the far west end at San Luis Pass, we actually put a dedicated patrol on the weekends and holidays in the season.
Definitely
just basically
needed.
All they do is keep people out of the water. I mean, those poor guys are just back and forth, having fishermen cuss them out all day
Not
long
a job I would want, I'll tell you.
It's awful. And we rotate it. So they bear the brunt a couple days, and then they go to an easier place. But I think it's emotionally really hard, because nobody wants to be told that, I'm only in waist deep water fishing. I've been fishing here 400 years, and now you're telling me I can't, and you're like 12 years old, all the stuff they put up with. And, so I think we've been doing it a number of years now. And so we, it's a little easier now, because people kind of know what the deal is. But if you look at the stats, I mean, we were averaging on the San Luis Pass about 4 drownings a year. If you look at both sides, Brazoria County and our side. And that's really high drowning numbers. I mean, that's 2 deaths at least in Galveston a year just on that area.
Can you tell us what the dangers are at San Luis Pass?
Yeah. And just putting them out there keeps, really has dropped that number to like 1 every forever. So the pass and the ship channel on the east end are similar. They're not rip currents that are the issue. It's tidal currents. So as the tide, comes in and out, all that water that goes all the way up to wherever north of Houston has to go in and out of these 2 little narrow places that are a mile across to 2 miles across, something like that. So it funnels through there like a fire hose that gets reduced, so it shoots through there. And what that does is, it moves the sand around with it. And so it can scour out really deep drop-offs close to shore. It can change like by the minute. And so you may go at noon and there's just no current and there's really no drop-off. And then, 4 hours later, the current's ripping through there and there's a huge drop-off that your kids can fall into right offshore. And so, because that, you can just see how, in a population of Texans that have a huge percentage of non-swimmers, it's pretty easy to step off there and get overwhelmed, right? And so that's really the main thing that hits them, is those tidal currents. Whereas on the beachfront, it's really rip currents, and that's going to be a current that runs, away from shore. Next to a structure, you pretty much are guaranteed to have one, but you also have them in other areas, depending on the tide, the waves, the wind, all that kind of stuff. But you're going to have a rip current every day of the year of some magnitude. It can be light, strong, overwhelming, by every structure that sticks out there, whether it's a fishing pier or some kind of, like breakwater or, the one that we have here are these groins that, we have the 15 groins just all over the place right here.
Yeah. Rip currents never sleep.
No, and you remember when you were a guard, like that was probably your, the day you knew you were going to work, or the day you got assigned to a groin with busy crowds and some
red flag,
some nice lateral current running.
Ooh.
You're going to be in the water all day.
All day.
Days, right? Yeah.
All day.
Yeah.
I do look back on Beach Patrol with like really fond memories, but those were rough days for sure.
Well, it's good that, you were a really good guard, so that helps, but that also means you were probably twice as tired as you could have been.
Yeah, so running to both sides of the jetties.
That's right.
Constantly back and forth. All right, so back to a little bit of Galveston history. I did not want to come to this interview and not ask you about this guy, Leroy Colombo. Can you tell us a little bit about that guy?
I can tell you a little bit. I didn't know him personally, so I was really good friends with his best friend, which is Ducky Prendergast.
Okay.
And so Ducky and he grew up together. They were on the same block, and they were just cohorts the whole way through. And so everything I know about Leroy Colombo is same as you. It's hearsay. Yeah. It's stories. It's stories from my mom, who actually kind of knew him when she was a kid, stuff like that. And mostly from Ducky, because Ducky's, I used to sit down there. Ducky, after he was a lifeguard and then he was at the railroad and he did all this other stuff, he ended up having an umbrella business down there at 59th Street for years. And so, as a lifeguard or a lifeguard supervisor or whatever, I used to spend a lot of time down there, just hearing his stories, talking to him. I would go to his house, hang out with him and his wife, Harriet. Yeah. And as he kind of moved off the beach, as he got older, because he got into his 90s, he would let me come by and pick him up. And this is when I was sort of like the, higher up in Beach Patrol. Yep. So he'd like, hey, can you come pick me up and let me see the beach? And so I would take him up and down the beach and he would tell me all the stories about all the places. And, you just really.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like when you have opportunities like that and you're busy and you're young and you're in the productive times of your life, you really got to take advantage of them. And I was really happy that, I liked Ducky so much that it was never a burden to hang out with him and hear his stories. But I'm really happy just to have had the luck to have connected with him for all that time. So anyway, he told me a bunch of stories. So kind of feel like with all the other stories about him put in context about racing Johnny Weissmuller and all the stuff that you heard about him, swimming out to the shrimp boats and getting the illegal hooch and putting him on his belly and backstroking it back in because he worked, with the mob and with the Macios and all this stuff. Bouncer at the, over there at the Balinese room, like all the things he did. He was in his kind of getting to his rock star status in Galveston. So everybody knew who he was. He had his, he was everywhere. Like everybody knew him. And so he had beat Johnny Weissmuller, who was Tarzan, the old Tarzan, who was an Olympic champion. He was like the early version of Greg Louganis or whatever. And so Galveston's, a national, if not international destination. Everybody knew what Galveston was back then. It was, we were kind of our peak of importance in that way, at least. There's accounts of him swimming 7 miles to the South Jetty. There's some of him swimming to and from the South Jetty. And when he beat Johnny Weissmuller, that's what it was. It was a 7-mile swim to the South Jetty. And he could do side stroke and float along. He was like a big barrel chested dude. Yep. Johnny Weissmuller probably cranked out that first, mile and then he had the rest, or something like that, because he was like a speed guy. Right? Yeah. So he beat Johnny Weissmuller. I think he beat him twice, whatever. But
I know he was deaf, right?
Deaf mute. Yeah.
Deaf mute. Yeah. And he has the Guinness Book of World Records record for the most rescues of all time, of all time in the world.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. He does. And it's almost 1,000.
Oh my God, that's insane.
Yeah. And you got to think about the time. Like there was some guys like George Freeth, who was a Hawaiian guy that sort of was in the LA beaches, and he introduced surfing to a lot of the U.S. He was an incredible waterman. But if you think about the time back then, there weren't a lot of good swimmers around. Like we didn't have triathletes. We didn't have all these people on swim teams like we do now. Like even the guards that we pull into our program, they're good athletes. But I mean, back then they would have been like gods, because really like there just wasn't that level of water safety. So if you have someone like Colombo, who's extremely comfortable in the water, spends all his time on the beach, big, strong guy, and he starts making rescues, it must just be like looking at Superman, really. And the way he did a lot of these rescues over at Murdoch's, they had, these kind of ropes that they ran out in the water because people, they really couldn't swim mostly. Yep. So they would kind of walk out there in all their clothes and swimming gear or whatever and hold onto these ropes. And then occasionally they'd lose their footing, or a set would come in and knock them off the rope, or, a lot of them would be hanging on these ropes and couldn't get back to shore. Yep. And Colombo apparently, big guy, he would just go and throw like kids up on his chest and backstroke in, or he started using, we had his original, which I think is the first surfboard rescue board ever in this area, that was his. And so he would apparently use this. It was a hollow it was kind of like a boat design back then. They wasn't balsa or anything like that. And he would use this board to go out. And I think he used the surf mats.
Oh, really?
They used to have, you probably didn't start with surf mats here, but they were like, when I started, they rented them here, but they were like a shorter version. They were like 4 feet long or something. But the guys, like the little bit ahead of me, we're always talking about the 6-foot surf mat, and they would overinflate them. Really? And they would surf on them. Because they had these ridges and stuff like that. So, Tyke Kiprius, right? He used to be a beach boy out here on the beach. He's probably 10, 12 years older than me or something like that, maybe a little bit older. But he used to apparently overinflate it, and he was a surfer, and he would go out there and catch waves on this thing. So I think, the Colombo time led into that too, because Ducky told me that they used to make rescues on surf mats a lot. So basically they would go out, grab these people off these ropes, throw them on the surf mat, and then bring them to shore. And we do, really similar stuff now with rescue boards. Yeah. But we make most of our rescues really keep it really simple. It's a rescue tube and fins. And that's, how you made your rescues when you were here. And that's how, all our guards, mostly probably 90% of our rescues are happening with those. And then you've got a smattering that happens with rescue boards. Or, we use jet skis all the time. We have like 5 jet skis that are busy all day, all the time. And so we do, stuff that's farther from shore, boat wrecks, that kind of stuff. A lot of those we make in jet skis or even with a boat.
Galveston Beach Patrol also assists other beach patrols in other countries either get started or assist their programs kind of get rolling. Is that how that works? Or?
It is. And that's an interesting kind of way that developed. And this is kind of right place, right time stuff. But so for whatever reason, I'm pretty bilingual. Like I speak Spanish pretty decent. And we went with a sister city committee down to Veracruz, which was, years back. This me and Vic Maceo went with a delegation from Galveston. And we connected to some of their lifeguards. They had just started a lifeguard program, like brand new, and they didn't know what they were doing at all. Like so they had, maybe kids of fishermen kids or, whatever they had. Then they had these 2 really just amazing jet skis, like shiny but then none of them could swim very well and, that kind of stuff. And so we were there and I was like, well, how did you learn? Cause they don't have other lifeguard services up and down the coast. And they didn't have, like, we had the benefit of, all this connection to California and the East Coast. We learned so much from these other groups when we were starting to professionalize. And they were like, well, 2 ways. We know a lot about the water because of the fishing, because that's a fishing community. Yep. And they really do know. I mean, the boat skills of these guys is just off the charts. Mm-hmm. And then the other one they had a great source was from America of information from a TV show called Guardianes de la Bahia, which I was like, what is it? Oh, Baywatch. Yeah, so they learned a lot from Baywatch. So needless to say, they were all about the form, but not the content, if that makes sense. But so we ended up offering, to have them come up, and we sent a team down, and that started a relationship, and we've been doing it for about 20 years. And so we're looking at even next November, we're talking about sending a team down. But because I'd done that work, and was reasonably proficient in Spanish, I got asked, I was doing this side hustle thing where I taught some Red Cross stuff to a school down in Venezuela. Okay. And so I went down there. I had some connection through my brother or whatever, and they just contracted with me to teach, like a lifeguarding class. And when I was there, the president of the United States Lifeguarding Association at the time was like, hey, I've been corresponding with this person with their national YMCA, and they want to start a beach program. Could you bring them our manual down there? That was pre, good internet, like that kind of stuff. So I was like, sure. So I went down there. I went to the YMCA, which is on the other side of Caracas, which is a whole different world from the private school I was teaching there, right? And I really, I was there, and they were like, hey, can you come tomorrow? And can you do this? And so I was like, so I ended up during the time I was there teaching the school stuff in the morning, and the afternoon I'd go over to the YMCA and work with them. And they had just an amazing program. They had kids that were street kids that they brought up, and they lived in this big structure, and they became their instructors and all this stuff. And so I ended up spending time with them and starting to work with them a bit. And I ended up making 12, 14 trips down to Venezuela, and doing that. And while that was going on, I started getting more involved in our national association. So, now I'm it's like 3rd term of agony, but I'm the president of our National Lifeguard Association in the U.S. now, right? Mm-hmm. Which is mostly the beach organizations. And I do work for this international group called the International Lifesaving Federation, which that connected me to, which is, in the Americas region, the Caribbean and Latin America, that kind of stuff.
Of course.
So I'm kind of like the coordinator of aid, like a Secretary General is the title, right?
I like that, Secretary General.
It feels very European, doesn't it? Right? And then, so I've been doing, a bunch of work through them all around. And then the cool thing about it is for the Galveston Beach Patrol, through this conduit, we know about life-saving, techniques from anywhere, Europe, all through Asia, South America, and so you can kind of pick the things that work for our environment. And we've learned so much through that. And the other thing is we get to showcase our lifeguard service, which is just exceptional, and so we can actually export some of what we're doing. So like our procedure manual, for example, we get asked all the time if people can have a look at that and adapt it to their stuff. We help set up the lifeguard services, 2 of them down in South Padre Island. We help with the Port Aransas one. We're working on Corpus. We're still working on Corpus, but trying to get Texas all on the same page with that too. But also, been able to really do stuff, all over the place. Like I went to Norway a couple of years ago. They're starting a beach program there, and they wanted to have, they really liked what we were doing here in Galveston, and they liked some of the U.S. stuff. And so they wanted to have like a resource for that too. And I could list a bunch of places, but it's been, a real fun ride. I never thought life-saving would, expose you to that kind of stuff, but it's just been such a great benefit for us here in Galveston, because if there's anything we need, like we have all these connections.
You've got this international network, and really you can pull, like you said, you can pull from anywhere in the world. If there's a new technique or there's something going on over in Asia, you can bring it here, and vice versa. And they learn from what
it's true
you guys are doing in Galveston.
Yeah, and it's really like I think it's just in the spirit of what public safety is about, and really what Galveston's been about. I mean, we're a community that has been never afraid to like adapt and hork stuff from other places, and and modify it to our own purposes and stuff like that. And I think that our lifeguard service is a reflection of who we are as a people here in Galveston.
I couldn't agree more. Could not agree more.
Yeah.
All right, Peter, is there anything else you want to plug for anybody listening?
I always, if you listen, I'll just run through some safety stuff. Yeah. So you're going to bring your family to the beach real soon. Our number one concern is rip currents, and the way to avoid rip currents is to do a couple of things. The number one thing is to swim near a lifeguard, use that resources, let them be that extra layer of protection. For you and your family how to stay safe. There's plenty of information out there. Our website's, right there for you. You can grab it off of there if you don't have another source. But also you have that extra layer of protection with your lifeguard. And that also will be a reminder to keep you out of those areas with rip currents. And that lifeguard can tell you, are there rip currents that you don't see? Because they're really hard to spot. And so there may be some in the middle of the beach that you're not aware of, and you don't want your kid going right out there into a rip current. And they can remind you not to get close to the rocks. So the big ones here is swim near a lifeguard and avoid rip currents. We also don't want to swim at the ends of the island. We kind of talked about those tidal flows at San Luis Pass and out there at the ship channel. Don't swim by yourself. Make sure you're with somebody, because if you start getting overwhelmed, they can call for help for you. Don't dive in head first. Our water's not always crystal clear here in Galveston, although it does get clear sometimes. You hear that in Houston? It's clear here a lot. But you don't want to dive in because you don't want to hit your head on a sandbar or a rock or something like that. And then, we as Texans need a continual reminder that alcohol and water don't mix. And so if you're drinking, that's when you stay out. And then, with children, there's always issues with lost kids. We sometimes have as many as 60 a day just at Stewart Beach. You probably have some good memories about lost kids lined up at your tower and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, you want to make sure that you have a plan with your kids. Lifeguard tower number 7 is where we'll meet if we get separated, for example. Enter the water with small kids. And the new buzz in life-saving world, not just beach, is assign a water watcher. So if you're with a group, make sure one adult has uninterrupted focus on the people in the water. And so you know what your plan is. You may not be able to want to go in and save them yourself, but you're near a lifeguard, so you can alert the lifeguard if they don't catch it before you do. Those are the big ones. There's plenty of others, but we've talked a bunch. I don't want to ramble on too much.
Oh, no, yeah.
I sure appreciate the ability to get some time with you. This is a great program. Yeah.
Well, Peter, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Chief, and talk to you soon.
Thanks. You.
Thank you for listening to this conversation with Chief Peter Davis. If you learned anything or enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. It is people like you that keep this podcast going and growing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And please follow us on social media. We are literally everywhere. Just check out the link below in the episode notes. Again, thank you for listening, supporting, and we will see you next time on Galveston Unscripted. For historic resources or more information, check out the episode description.